Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Gordon, and thanks for joining us for this conversation with Dr. Randall Pinkett and Dr. Jeffrey Robinson. We're here to talk about their new book, Black Faces in High Places, 10 Strategic Actions for Black Professionals to Reach the Top, and most importantly, stay there. In the book, they highlight the experiences of other Black faces in high places, including Barack and Michelle Obama, Oprah Winfrey, Ursula Burns, and Senator Cory Booker, just to name a few. The book is an essential guide for Black professionals who are moving up through their organizations or industries, but need a roadmap and how to keep climbing. We'll be taking your questions, so please type your questions in the chat, and we'll get to a number of them as the hour progresses. Let me introduce you now to the authors. Dr. Randall Pinkett is an entrepreneur, speaker, author, scholar, and leading voice for his generation in business, technology, diversity, and inclusion. He is co-founder, chairman, and CEO of BCT Partners, a multi-million-dollar research, training, consulting, technology, and data analytics firm. The company has been recognized by Forbes as one of America's best management consulting firms and has been named by Black Enterprise to its BE 100 list of the nation's largest African-American-owned businesses. And Dr. Jeffrey Robinson, PhD, international speaker, entrepreneur, and associate professor of management and entrepreneurship at Rutgers University's Business School. He is also the academic director of the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development and Research Fellow of the Rutgers Advanced Institution for the Study of Entrepreneurship and Development. Gentlemen, I welcome you both. Congratulations on the book. Let me start by asking, I guess, the obvious question. Why now? This is book 2 for you guys. Randall, let me start with you, if I might. Why now?
Well, first, Ed, I want to say thank you for your willingness to host this event. You've been a supporter of mine and the work I've been doing, and you being an award-winning journalist, we're honored that you would take time out of your schedule to moderate and facilitate this conversation.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody else for coming out that is joined the webinar as well. And to answer your question, Ed, 3 things I would say led us to this crossroads of releasing this book on this topic in this moment. First is we wrote Black Faces in White Places back in 2010, so it's been 12 years. And quite frankly, we suffered from author fatigue. When we were done with that book, we needed a break. Yeah. And you could probably relate to that. It's a lot of work to write a book. I see Dr. Robinson shaking his head. The second and third reason are perhaps more to your question. The events of the summer of 2020, the murder of George Floyd, naturally that lifted up a number of conversations around Black people, around equity, around what have been our experiences and our modern day challenges. And then second was COVID-19, which lifted up another set of conversations around inequities and how COVID-19 was in many ways a reflection of deeper systemic issues plaguing our communities. And so the timing just seemed right to release a book that focused specifically on Black leadership, because we believe Black leadership matters and matters now, arguably more than ever before, given the moment we're in, which we're hoping can become a movement.
Dr. Robinson, let me ask you to echo that. And I think one of the interesting points for me when I looked at the book initially was the last portion of it, and that's staying there. Because too often what we're seeing, and we'll get to this in just a moment, but I think about the NFL coaching carousel and what we've been looking at. You know, a Black coach may get a job, but he isn't necessarily going to get the same opportunity to stay as a white coach. So talk to me about how you all decided to make sure that that was intentional.
Yeah, it was intentional because we saw some of those same patterns happening, in large companies and organizations. You could see it in some politics and in other areas as well. But what was missing, as far as we could tell from the discourse, was what's the roadmap to get there and to stay there. For us, we look at other people's books and we love those books that really affirm the experience of being a Black professional. I can think of books by Brittany Cooper or by Austin Channing Brown, where they're talking about what it's like to be, in the workplace or to have certain challenges. But what we wanted to do was to go one step further and say, yes, we will tell you a bit about some of the challenges, but how do you navigate it? And especially if you are somewhere, as we like to say, in the middle of the organization, the middle of your career. You've been doing entrepreneurship for a while, and now you're looking to go to the next step. So how do you navigate to that next level? That's where we think our book contributes to the conversation for Black professionals.
Randall, here's the interesting point that I found as I perused the book, and that's the idea that you have also given examples for those who find themselves in the tall cotton, as folk used to say, and the experiences that they have, so people can relate, so they won't necessarily always think that I'm the only one facing this. And these are people that are recognizable, so you see the outcome, that there is an end result that can be successful.
That's exactly right. This book, on one hand, chronicles the experiences of Black faces who have found themselves in high places and been able to stay there, getting back to your theme a moment ago. But the other piece of it is we also demystify what that journey looked like. It's easy to see someone's glory, but not their story. It's easy to see their product and not their process. And when you get into the inner workings of how Ursula Burns was mentored by Anne Mulcahy, or Ken Chenault was mentored by Harvey Golub, or I look to the Harlem Children's Zone and how Jeffrey Canada partnered with Druckenmiller. Like, these are stories behind the stories. So it's no longer guesswork to understand what were the strategic actions that they took. Again, not just to get to the top, because it's a different set of challenges once you get to the top.
Right.
Different pressures, different expectations, all eyes are on you. The margin of error has become far more narrow, and the effects of mistakes is only exacerbated when you're a Black face in a high place. And you know this, Ed, because you've been in these high places yourself. So all of that we try to demystify, to tell the story, but to do it in a way that they could see behind the curtain.
Jeff, here's what's interesting to me. I'd like you to speak on it, and then Randall, follow up if you will, because I think the most important part of what you talk about in the book is mindset, and not just your mindset, but the mindset of the people that you're working for. And so you can only control one of the two, but your eyes can be open to make sure that you understand, as you look at things, what the mindset is for those you work for. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, we talk about mindsets. We talk about skill sets and tool sets as well. But the mindset's really critical. You have to get your mind right, right? That's where we use that expression. You have to know why you're here. You think about, we call it, talking about self-determination a lot in the beginning of the book, and finding your meaning and purpose. And in order to do that, we give you some steps to do it. So some of this has to do with who you're hanging out with, what the conversation is about, who's pouring into you, who's giving you encouragement. We talk a lot these days about mental health, and often we find out that a lot of Black professionals feel isolated, and that's dangerous. It's not healthy to have that. So part of the mindset conversation is what's happening on the inside of you, and then strategically thinking about how to have the right mindset for the journey ahead.
Randall, how do you find that mentor, that person? I talk to a lot of young people, and have over the course of many years now. I've watched people go to corporate America, and sometimes they just sit and look for a mentor, or they're disappointed when that one person says to them, "Oh, call me," and then you call and they don't pick up and they don't return the call. And I try to tell people, it isn't necessarily because they don't care about you, but life got in the way, and the priority list, you just weren't high enough to get that call back. So how do we kind of move past the things that have been happening for generations and teach a little better how to navigate those waters?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that coin from what we talk about in the book. One side is what you put out into the universe. I believe in the law of attraction. I believe that when you demonstrate your very best, and we talk in the book about strategic action 3, self-mastery, and how you are able to exude a level of of excellence and professionalism and accomplishment, you're going to attract people to you. And you're going to see people who are going to want to step in to mentor you because they see potential, they see possibilities in you. But then there's another piece of it is you being proactive. I often draw the analogy of how people can get very strategic about romantic relationships. I mean, they have their list, they've got their strategy, they're on Match.com, they're on eHarmony, they're looking to figure out how to navigate networks and relationships to get to the right person. And in that same vein, when you think about your alumni networks, think about your faith-based community, think about friends of friends, asking for referrals, putting out into the universe. Again, I'm looking for someone who could mentor me in data analytics. Do you know anyone? Floating it on social media, LinkedIn, there's lots of avenues. So I believe you have to exude the very characteristics in others you're seeking, but I also believe you got to be strategic and proactive.
How do we make sure that we're passing this down to middle managers, to those on the brink of trying to kind of make the breakthrough to C-suites, the corner C-suites, and frankly, you know, the younger generation? Because one of the things that I hope for when we have these kinds of forums is that those of us who are on here really should be bringing a young person on with us each time we do this kind of thing. How do we make sure that we're not just losing the message in the hour that we sit on these Zoom calls, that we actually internalize it and then take it with us?
Well, I'll weigh in on that one. You know, it has to be deliberate and intentional. There are, mentoring programs. There are opportunities for you to interact with young people. You know, I teach at Rutgers University. And so whenever student groups ask me to come and talk to them, I take advantage of it. And a lot of folks, just sort of let those things go by. But sometimes it also means recommending some things to them. So for us, part of the reason we wrote our first book and part of the reason we've written this second book is to put down some of those gems, those thoughts that will be helpful especially for some of our younger colleagues. And one of the ways I'd recommend for people to use our book is to do a little reading group, and you get busy as a senior executive or a person who's made a lot of things and been very successful, but you could find a small group of young people and do a little reading group with them and get their points. You're going to learn something from them as much as they may learn something from you.
How has your friendship, the two of you, helped one another along? Because, the higher you climb, the lonelier it gets for people of color, quite frankly. You mentioned the alienation, Randall, that people feel. How have you all been able to make sure that you guys walk together and be a sounding board for each other?
Yeah, can't emphasize that enough, Ed. And
30 years.
Yeah, 30 years.
A long time.
Jeffrey and I are grateful that our paths crossed when they did and how they did. We met at a meeting of the National Society of Black Engineers at Rutgers. I know we got a lot of Rutgers folks on this Zoom right now. And it was the first meeting of the organization where they told you, look around and say hello to somebody. And Jeffrey turned around and in his words, saw another tall, skinny guy and said, "I'm Jeffrey Robinson." I said, "I'm Randall Pinkett." And that's how we met. And if you fast forward, we then connected with two first-year students when we were second-year students, where we were assigned as their mentors. Lawrence Hibbert, who I was assigned to, Dallas Grundy, who Jeffrey was assigned to. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, the four of us came together back on the campus of Rutgers. And now, almost 30 years later, we're still together in business, having launched our first venture when we were students at Rutgers. I affectionately describe us, and Jeffrey's heard me say this, as New Edition with no Bobby Brown. We were able to come together, stay together. We didn't have to kick anybody out of the group. But to your question, we've been able to support each other and sustain each other across that trajectory. That when one is down, the other picks them up. And when the other succeeds, the other celebrate. There's no ego. There's no competition if it's not a friendly competition. And that has given us solace and support as we've become higher and higher in our careers to have sounding boards that we can trust and turn to.
Let me read a question that we have. It's from Valerie Mason Robinson, and these questions are going by quickly, so I'm trying to keep it. She says, what about accountability, peer-to-peer mentoring? That's important, I would suspect.
Oh yeah, yeah. Accountability. Some people use the term accountability partners or peer counts, peer mentoring. It just keeps you motivated. You have somebody else who you've shared, your goals for the year or your objectives for this quarter, and they just come back periodically and say to you, "Hey, how you doing on that? How you're making progress." And that little interaction puts it at the forefront of your mind to keep working on it. I know over the years, that's what, Randall and I mean, before he was Dr. Pinkett and I was Dr. Robinson, we were motivating one another. When he went for advanced degrees, I was going for advanced degrees because I looked around and I said, hey, well, we can kind of push each other. I could ask him what his progress was. When he was working on his dissertation up at MIT, I would ask him how he was doing. He would explain things he was working on. And then I was working on mine at Columbia. And that motivation is just there because we're holding each other accountable. Powerful. It's a powerful tool that we all gotta use and share.
We have to be honest, though, about advancements and regressions, because we are seeing a landscape that we have seen over the last, I'd say 15 years fairly, of regressions in African Americans in the highest positions in corporate America. How do we deal with that? I went to high school and friends with Rosalind Brewer, the CEO of Walgreens, and Roz has, been one of those who's been able to have a stellar career over 30 plus years now, but she is an anomaly, quite frankly, and unfortunately. How can we as a community make sure that we aren't losing the gains that we saw with a spate of African Americans who held CEO positions for a moment, and then that started to go away?
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off what was in the chat from Leo Wallace. I think we have to be clear about the difference between mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship. Mm-hmm. Mentorship is about your development. Sponsorship, which gets to the real crux of your question, is about advancement. And then allyship is about dismantling the barriers that might impede your development and your advancement. And when we are in the high places, naturally, we've been able to navigate the barriers ourselves, Roz Brewer being a classic example. But what we have to be ever mindful of is dismantling the barriers that made it more difficult for us to get there. Because we're not recruiting at certain schools, it's a barrier. Because our interview panels are not diverse, that's a barrier. Because we're not mindful of where our dollars are flowing to businesses and procurement, that Black-owned businesses aren't in our supply chain, that's a barrier. And so one of our messages in the book is, at some point in your career, you have to be able to look back and say, you dismantled something, you fought for something, you made something different that it's easier for whoever comes after you. And that's the only way we'll make progress. If you arrive in the high place and you leave the Roz Brewers of the world and nothing is different, the status quo will remain.
Yeah, and let me just add something to that. There's, as of this recording here, we are looking at five Black people who are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. I want to name their names because sometimes we don't acknowledge this as much as we should. Got Craig Arnold at Eaton, got Rosalind Brewer at Walgreens, Thasunda Brown Duckett at TIAA Cref, Marvin Ellison at Lowe's, and Renee Jones at M&T Bank. That's 5. That's 1%. And there are barriers to get there. It should be much more than that. Even if we just talk about parity, meaning we should have an equal percentage of Black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, similar to our proportion of the population. That would be 65. That'd be 13 times what we've got as of right now. So there's something there, something going on in corporate America, but also, it's something we're talking about in our book.
And if not that, it should not be as abysmal as 1%, as you suggest there. Victoria Chapman asked, what's a good way to go about finding a sponsor?
Yes. Yeah, the sponsorship piece is one that has to often be born out of a relationship. Yep. No one, and we've been channeling some Hamilton lately, because they're the ones that are in the room where it happens. That's where you want your sponsor advocating and speaking on your behalf. But that's got to be born of a relationship, which means two things. First, we have to often, for better or worse, we have to often formalize the connections that we're making across ethnicity and across gender, because in the absence of formalizing those connections, people tend to associate with people who are like them. And if whites and men are the ones in power, they're tending to connect to, mentor, and sponsor those who reflect their own identities. But second to that is we have to be very strategic ourselves about how we broker our relationships. Right. One of the studies we cite in the book is from David Thomas. David Thomas is now president of Morehouse. He was formerly a scholar at Harvard. He compared minority executives who reach the top to minority managers who plateau. And one of the things he found was that minorities who reach the top tend to have very heterogeneous, diverse mentoring relationships. The managers who plateaued, watch me, tended to have networks that were either all Black or all white, which means neither. If you think an all white network is going to serve you well, it doesn't. If you think an all Black network will serve you well, it doesn't. Only when we extend ourselves beyond our own traditional walls to have diverse relationships do we then broker the sponsorships and the mentorships and the allyships that we need.
And Jeff, sometimes that comes with stepping out of your comfort zone.
It sure does. I mean, and we talk about comfort zones in the book in strategic action number 2. When you are in that box of your comfort zone, you're not experiencing growth. All right, you're not getting beyond your close ties network of people who are just like you. We talk about Carla Harris, the vice chair of Morgan Stanley. She has a great TED talk about sponsorship. And one of the other tips that I would point to Victoria, who asked the question, is that part of sponsorship is getting beyond your level in the organization, which can be very comfortable, you and your peers. But to get recognized and to get to meet and to talk to people who are at those other levels in the organization, they're the people who are in the rooms when they're making those decisions. And often for many of us, that's uncomfortable. But that uncomfort or discomfort can be a stumbling block, and you've got to break out of that to be able to get to a level of growth and have a network that really helps you in your journey.
I'm curious. I'll ask you both this. I had a book that came out. Now it's been about 2 years ago, called Conversations in Black, and I talked to a myriad of leaders from different disciplines, and it was a faux conversation, if you will. None of us were in the same room, but it read as if we were talking. And part of the reason I wrote it, and one of the reasons that I wanted to really delve into what we talked about, is I think we are in need of new narratives, that we've reached a plateau in some areas and we continue to kind of do the same things and in hopes of breaking through, and we're not. And we're, I think, maybe stymied and not sure how to go. Let's use the NFL coaching carousel, which we mentioned a few moments ago, as an example. They instituted a Rooney Rule that was supposed to increase the number of African Americans who were hired, yet all it really increased were those who were interviewed, and those were fake, as we found out anyway, because they had already essentially hired people for the job before they interviewed the Black candidates. Give me a sense of what you both would like to see as maybe new narratives, a new design for us moving not only in corporate America, but into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, great question, Ed. And I'll take it from 2 angles. I think part of the broken narrative has been focused on, well, what do Black and brown people need to do to better navigate these environments? And I put it back on the organizations, foundations, corporations, academic institutions, law firms. What are you doing to make it more equitable for Black and brown people to advance through your organization? And that's part of the racial reckoning of the summer of 2020, is turning that narrative on its head and saying, no, certainly we can do what we can do to be strategic, but there are some barriers that I don't care how smart, how strategic, how much you've learned from what other people have done, you're not breaking through. And the Rooney Rule, to your point, is a perfect example. Flores' lawsuit will hopefully facilitate the kind of systemic changes that otherwise would always stymie the advancement and opportunities for Black coaches in the NFL. So I think we got to change that narrative and turn it on its head and really put increasingly more pressure on organizations to make the structural changes needed to facilitate opportunity.
Well, and the other way to change the narrative is to change the owners, because we're talking about multi-layered organizations, right? So the head coach is certainly important, but there are owners that are on the top of that organization of all the NFL teams. And as of today, there are no Black owners. A league that has 70% Black players. There are no Black people who are in the ownership chair, and that may change in the near future. But I can tell you right now that if there were more Black owners in the NFL, then we wouldn't have this conversation the same way we're having it right now about what the NFL is and isn't doing.
Yet, I guess my question would be, how do we do that without some sense of, a moral degradation by an individual owner? It would be hard to oust them. Even if you look to the Washington football team or Commanders or whatever they're calling themselves now, there's been question about, moral and ethical questions there raised in the environment there, and Snyder is still the owner. So how do we go about that?
Well, you hinted to it earlier, Ed, and it really does lie in entrepreneurship. Yeah. We increasingly need to exercise our economic wherewithal and begin instilling entrepreneurship at a younger and younger age. The challenge with the NFL owners is that they're owners, and they can basically say to the league and to everyone else, who are you to tell me what to do with my team? That's what it boils down to. And I remember someone criticizing Oprah for her philanthropy, and Oprah's response was, who are you to tell me what to do with my money? And so I love what I see from a Michael Jordan, right? Like I love what I see from a Kathy Hughes or even a Bob Johnson. I love what I see from a Robert F. Smith, or a Reginald F. Lewis, if you want to take it back, who saw a vision for wealth creation that far surpassed what others who preceded them could have imagined. And now when Oprah controls her own cable network and her own magazine and her own school in Africa and her own radio network, that's power. That's influence. And it all boils down to, we call it FU money. Some might put a pejorative in there, but I call it forget you money. We need more forget you money in our communities so we can tell people, forget you.
Right. And we need more Black billionaires. That's a simple way of saying it too.
Yeah, indeed. Let me go to a couple of these questions very quickly. Constance says, how do you ensure that Black faces in higher places got there by merit and not seen as tokenism to feel good candidates? I'm not sure that we can control that. That's the person who sits across from them, but any ideas there?
Well, I mean, you're right in that sometimes you can't control people's perceptions, but part of the narrative and part of the themes that we talk about in the book is that you are going to be evaluated by your performance. So, that's the baseline. That's not even a discussion that we're going to have a long discussion on. You have to be excellent at what you do. We're going to help you think about what you should be excellent in, help you to think about where you can be excellent, but that's a given. So then after that, it's okay. How do we navigate in these spaces? Much of the story is about how, when you get to that level of the organization, how you are building relationships and building power. And that's something we talk about in strategic action number 4. We call it network and build power. And then who are you partnering with? What's your mindset? How are you thinking if you're inside of a big organization intrapreneurially? And how are you thinking if you're outside of an organization, in your own organization or your own company? How are you thinking entrepreneurially? And in both cases, there are strategic ways to go about it that puts you in very not only competitive, but may give you advantage amongst your peers because you're bringing value to the table that other people can't do. That's one of the other themes of the book. Your ethnicity, your Blackness is an asset, not a liability. Change that narrative, and now we've got something to talk about.
Right, right. And you got to be honest in terms of what kind of armor you need. I can't tell you how many dinners I went to or events I went to where I might have been one of two or three or four blacks there. And God help me that I made it through, but I knew the importance of being there, and sometimes you just have to suck it up and go. And, you talk about how corny it was when you left, but you got to be there. Here's a question from Eric who says, what's the advice you would give to people just finishing college or high school to navigate those important years to build the right network?
Yeah, to the college grads and to the aspiring Black faces in high places, I would say first leverage the tools that are at your disposal, which we didn't have when we were coming through. I mean, LinkedIn, all the social networks that are available to not just establish connections, but to maintain connections. The power of connecting with the people that you've known from high school and college, and as they progress through their careers, being able to network and collaborate on opportunities. Can't put a price tag on that. But I also say be very strategic about how you build those relationships. We talk in the book about these three kinds of networks, about a borrowed network, an entrepreneurial network, and a hierarchical network. And without getting too much into the details of those, essentially says that if you want to connect with people who are more powerful, more influential, more senior than you, don't try to go direct. Go try to find somebody who knows the person that you're trying to connect to. If I'm trying to get to Barack Obama, God help me. But if I try to go through Ed Gordon, I might have a better shot.
God help you on that one too, but yeah.
And so it's borrowing someone else's network through your church, your alumni network. I mentioned these things earlier, but go to where you know that they can take you to places you don't know. You have a higher shot, higher leverage through a known entity than to try to go cold.
And Jeff, isn't it the idea of also being ready when you get there? I can't tell you how many times I have traveled with Magic Johnson or Bob Johnson and been with them in places where, of course, everybody's trying to give them a business card and an idea. And I'll never forget one day Bob was on an elevator. This guy ran and jumped on with us. He said, I can, his first mistake was telling Bob, he said, I can make you a lot of money. And I thought, yeah, okay, he's already a billionaire, but go ahead. And Bob said, okay, what's your pitch? Going down 10 flights on the elevator.
That's a true
guy didn't have
pitch.
it, wasn't ready, the whole nine. Isn't part of the issue just readying yourself?
Oh, absolutely. You got to be prepared. And you need to do the things that you need to do to be ready for those moments, for those positions. It doesn't really help somebody to get there and often get pushed up to the front and they're not ready to sing, right? No. They're not ready to do what needs to be done. And there's research that backs this up. Sometimes people want to take the fast track to the top. And the challenge with doing the fast track is that you don't have the same, relationships, battle scars, experiences of the people who took a little longer to get there and who've been there for a while. And so you get a new person in the block, you come up to that situation, and you are struggling because you don't have the relationships, you don't have the experience. And so I always advise Black professionals, don't always think that the fast track is the best way to go. Randall probably will say it, but I'll preempt him a little bit. We mentioned David Thomas and Breaking Through. He's a person and a book that we admire. And one of the research projects that he did, he charts the different plateaus and different parts and stages of a career. How does it go, Randall? When you are making that path, how does those different stages, how do those come together?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that when you're breaking in, which is early stage of your career, you're best served by having diverse relationships, borrowing networks. When you're breaking through kind of mid-tier to upper tier, when we think about advancement in particular, what we found from the study, it's in the book, is those who reach the top have fewer promotions than those who plateau. Now that's counterintuitive. Stated differently, those who plateau have more promotions than those who reach the top. Now, how do you reconcile that? The way you reconcile that is that those who reach the top more often than not are saying no to opportunities to advance because they know it's not a good fit for where they can shine the brightest. And so they are more discerning of what opportunities make sense to pursue. Like, nope, no, thank you. Nope, no, thank you. No, that one is a good look. Whereas those who plateau say yes to everything, don't do their best, don't show their best, and end up plateauing in their careers.
Yeah. I mean, again, going back to the NFL, we see that often Black candidates are given jobs that it's going to take 5 and 6 years to turn around, and they're not going to give you that rope, to turn it around. So you're going to fail. Anyone is going to fail those first couple of years. And here's a great question from Corey. It says, not everyone will have aspirations to be a CEO, but may still have the passion to achieve. How should these individuals navigate the workplace? That's a great question, because often when we talk about this thing, we do talk about, the highest cloud. But some people just want a nice career, can go on a yearly vacation and still feel satisfied with providing for their family and having a great career, but not the pressures, nor may not even have the inclination to run something.
Well, it's something we hear a lot. And for my response to most of those folks is, but you want to have some influence in your organization. Even if you're not at the very, very top, you want to have some influence. It's the same set of strategic actions. You're thinking about how to be entrepreneurial and thinking about different ways to leverage your position even within an organization. And then the other part some people are looking for is certain level of autonomy. You don't want to have to check with everybody to get things done. You want to feel as if you are empowered to make a difference within your company, even if you don't want to go all the way to the top. And again, it's strategic thinking that gets you there, and it will help you to have a peace of mind. You won't be sitting someplace dreading going into work, because you've had a much better experience and truthfully have identified those kinds of positions and opportunities that work for you.
Two great questions here. Let me start with this one. It says, I'm a second-year student athlete at Dartmouth College. Do you have any advice for starting my career post-graduation that I could use and share with my teammates?
Yes, so I am also a former student athlete. So shout to the student athletes in the building. I was track and field at Rutgers. That's right. And first, I would say, don't take for granted the lessons that you've learned on the playing field. Athletics isn't the only place you can learn these lessons, but it's certainly a great place to learn lessons about discipline, teamwork, physical fitness, how you can focus and be in the moment despite distractions that might disserve you. So those will serve you extraordinarily well in your career. But I would say in that regard is to play up those experiences. And that's a lesson not just for athletes, but for any experience that you have, because the traditional way of interviewing is asking people, it's behavioral interviewing, asking for examples that demonstrate the competencies that they're seeking. Athletics and other extracurriculars are wonderful food for thought for the examples you can provide to demonstrate the competencies for a job. It's like the argument we make for veterans returning from service, trying to find a job. So many of the skills they've learned in the military are transferable to the workplace. The same is true for athletics. The same is true for extracurricular activities. Play it up.
All right, here's the next one. Any advice on how I can be excellent as a software engineer? I'm new to the tech industry, and I was moved to this industry through seeing the success of people who were not African-American. So how can I excel in this field when historically this field has not known African-Americans in its top ranks?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Part of it is with that acknowledgement that there are very few people who look like you, in the ranks of the software engineers. There are some who have done it, and you need to get linked to them. You need to figure out how to connect with them. Now, again, there are different ways you may be a software engineer. If you're a software engineer in a large company or corporation, let's find out whether there is a Black employee resource group. Sometimes there are groups that are spread out across the company of Black employees, and that would be a great first step of connecting with other Black employees. You don't only connect with other Black employees, there may be other affinity groups, there may be other people who are what we affectionately call allies, who are looking out for people of color inside the company, who would be willing to mentor you. I mean, mentoring needs to have, you need to have more than one mentor. You know, think about who those people could be, people who you've met and admired. That's going to give you some inside information. And then look for someone who can also keep you abreast of the technical skills. Sometimes as a software engineer, your training and your information could be dated. So you want to figure out who's going to keep you up to date. Those are 3 different ways to think about your strategic choices you're going to be making over these next couple of years.
Here's one, and I would suspect that it probably depends on the company, but do employee resource groups play any part in moving up in a company?
I don't know what the research says, but I know what the anecdotes say. And that is that employee resource groups are effective in 3 ways. First is when they first came out, they were called affinity groups because you had an affinity for those who were like you. They were more social, networking, cultural support, cultural events. Then they evolved to what we know as ERGs. I now call them IRGs, inclusive resource groups, which are about development of their members, educating and providing opportunity for development throughout the organization. But then third, they're evolving to business resource groups, BRGs, where these organizations are identifying ways that they can align with the business objectives. They're helping with recruiting of certain demographics. They're helping to inform product development. They're looking at multicultural marketing, and they're informing which suppliers the organization should be engaging with. And so they're beginning to wield more power, more influence, getting back to our earlier conversation, that directly contribute to the business. So it's not just networking and social or developmental, which are all well and good, but it's strategic, it's impacting the business, and it's helping the organization to be more responsive and more responsible to Black people.
Yeah, and I have found as I've talked to and done programs for corporations over the years, it often depends on the CEO and how much they really want to see diversity and inclusion within those companies, and how much teeth they give to those groups. That really makes a difference. Here's an interesting question. As far as knowing people and things, what and who should you always know? Is there a particular position, a particular division that you should ingratiate yourself with?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. I'll put a couple on the table, and maybe Dr. Pinkett there will add to it. Usually people think about people who are in the hierarchy on the org chart. Shouldn't I know the CEO? Shouldn't I know the people in the C-suite? And if you just walked in the door in a big company, that's often not the case. It's not going to happen. But you do need to know the people who are doing the hiring, the people who are in your line or in your management. But I want to point out that there's one more set of people who you need to also understand are very important. I call them the gatekeepers. Some people want to discount or write off the executive assistants and executive administrators of some of the important people inside of a company or organization, and that's a mistake. Those are the folks who can.
That's a huge mistake.
Those are the folks you need to know, because they are the ones who set the calendars and make sure the emails get looked at, and can really help position you for success with somebody in upper management.
Let me bring up one other thing that's in the news right now, and that is Joe Biden's promise to appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court, at least put her up for the vote. Much of this, in terms of real change, is going to have to happen sometimes with a heavy hand, legislatively and the like. It's important for us to remember that, and when these kinds of things come up, we have to be present, do we not?
We absolutely do. I remember signing on to a letter during the last election from Black men to President Biden saying, you need to appoint a Black woman as your running mate. Mm-hmm. And that was literally days before he ended up selecting Kamala Harris as his running mate. For me, one of the most valuable messages from the book is this idea of being unapologetic. In the first book, we said something. We said, if you're not playing the game is playing you. And in this book, we say, you have to be unapologetic about your agenda because everyone around you is likely unapologetic about theirs. So if you're not intentional about, I need to get more Black suppliers into this business. I'm not saying you got to be strategic. You're not willy-nilly here, but I'm saying but you are intentional and unapologetic that says at a certain point, when you are a Black face in a high place, or even a Black face who's close to the high place, you have leverage at your disposal. The question is, are you willing to exercise those levers? We lifted up the examples we lifted up because these are people who had an agenda. They were strategic, they were unapologetic, but they didn't lose a sense of who they are. And the book begins with this idea of knowing who you are and where you're going. Because if you don't know who you are and where you're going, by the time you are in that high place, it's too late. It's too late. We've lost you and you've lost yourself, quite frankly. And so yes, Biden is indeed being unapologetic and saying, I don't care what y'all have to say. Now, Ed, we'll see if it works.
Right.
But I respect the gangster of saying, I'm going to try to make it happen.
It's interesting because, and I'm curious to ask both of you to touch on this. You can lose yourself, though, particularly a generation, over the last 30 years. Younger people are starting to change a bit, but the idea of losing yourself. I remember being at an executive leadership council dinner and them talking about many of the people who were kind of long in the tooth and getting ready to step away. Found themselves toward the end, but they said, they lost themselves because we were taught you had to homogenize yourself, you had to do certain things, and you didn't see it as selling out. You really saw it as strategic in climbing the ladder. But as that weighed on you over the years, you started to say, was it worth it in the end? How do we balance the idea of, to your point, not losing yourself, but being strategic and knowing how to manage, and not just in corporate America, that is as an entrepreneur as well. The idea of getting people to deal with you as an entrepreneur who may not see you as valuable and the like. How do we do that?
So, part of it is, let's just underscore something you said, that the executives who did that years ago were not happy. Were not happy with themselves, felt there was something missing. So, I feel as if there's one thing that's happened over the last few years, there is an acknowledgement that having some authenticity, bringing some of yourself, maybe not all of yourself, but some of yourself to the workplace, and not necessarily conforming is the approach that is the most effective. So because it takes energy to do that, and I would rather have people use that energy to do their work in a more excellent way, or to be more strategic about what they're thinking about. So I want to put that out there. Let me let Dr. Pinkett weigh in.
Yeah, and I'll add, paradoxically, while the book is called Black Faces in High Places, How to Reach the Top and Stay There, we open the book by telling stories of Black faces who reached the high place and didn't stay there. We tell the story of Lauryn Hill, and if you don't know all of the complexities of Lauryn Hill's story, get the book. We tell the story of Rodney Hunt. We call his story the rise and fall of a trailblazer. We call Lauryn Hill's story the rise and fall of an icon. And what you see in their stories was ill preparedness for getting to the top and facing those pressures. And to your point, Ed, losing a sense of who they are, not having solidified a sense of who they are. And when succumbing to the pressures, kind of foregoing identity, foregoing purpose, and being taken off track. What we don't want to see, and this is another one of the gifts of the book, is for someone to find themselves in that high place, only to realize that they were not firmly rooted and clear on their direction that it would allow them to sustain themselves when they do arrive.
Or to understand that you're willing to be sidetracked by means of their track on you, if you want to stay true to yourself. I mean, I remember having a conversation with my agent about how I dressed at NBC. It was a little too gangster for NBC, but I told them I wasn't. I saw too many black reporters put on a blue jacket and a red tie, and they didn't go anywhere either. So I might as well keep my little Detroit style and be sidetracked. Let me ask you guys as we close out, and we want to thank everybody for joining us. And it's wherever books are sold, but we'll also give you an opportunity of where you can get it. But I'll ask both of you, Dr. Robinson, I'll start with you, and then we'll have Dr. Pinkett close us out. But what would you like people to walk away with, not just with the book, but the idea of, as I mentioned, a new narrative, new direction in terms of how we can approach climbing the ladder, and as you both say, firm grip on it.
Yeah. There are a lot of themes we try to pull together in this book, but one of the themes is about the I said that already, that your Blackness, who you are is an asset. And we brought that theme in from our first book, and it rides all the way through the 10 strategic actions that we talk about in this book. When you change the narrative with what you do and how you do your work and the excellence you bring to the table, the connections you have, that is something that stands out. People have to treat you differently. Now, we in a subtle way, we're also calling out all the companies out there and all of the institutions that support and in some ways don't support Black employees, Black professionals, Black entrepreneurs, because what we're pointing out is that there are many stories of excellence, and they need to take notice. So the sort of that dialectic, that conversation between the corporations and institutions and structures of America, being able to recognize the Black excellence that's happening all around them, and they need to realize that it's right there. And then all of the Black professionals and employees and entrepreneurs that we talk to coming to the table and saying, we have something to say, you need to listen.
Yeah. I'll ask Renee to put up, if you would, in the chat. People are asking whether this was recorded. It was, and how it may be available after this, because I think, as I mentioned before, this is a great opportunity to share this with people who are just starting their careers, or those who are in middle management and feeling, a little lost at times. I mean, we really do need these conversations. Dr. Pinkett, I'll turn to you to ask that you close us off.
So I want to announce that we are launching a challenge as a part of the book, and I'm looking at each and every one of the tiles on my screen. I see a lot of familiar faces out there from friends and family and BCT partners and beyond. The Black Faces in High Places Challenge. We're asking everyone to get on social media and post a picture of a Black face in a high place that inspires you. I'm going to post in a moment Reginald F. Lewis, who was the first African-American to run $1 billion corporation. I still draw inspiration from this man, and add hashtag Black Faces in High Places. And I see somebody got the book right there in their tile. I'm not mad at you. Put Black Faces in High Places hashtag and BHM for Black History Month. This is a Black History Month challenge. Post a picture of a Black face in a high place that inspires you, and then challenge someone else to do the same. So I'm going to post to social media in just a second. I'm going to tag about 3 or 4 people and challenge them to join me in the challenge. And to your question, Ed, about closing us out, this is a way of us celebrating the legacy that we are all a part of. We are not new to being Black faces in high places. Like, we've been there, we've done that. We've got the t-shirt, we sold the t-shirt, we made money on the t-shirt. All this is saying, and you touched on this earlier, Ed, it's a new day with new challenges that needs new strategies. So let's abandon what worked for the last generation. Let's rally around what's going to work for our generation and define what our moment will be to be our movement. So let's join in the challenge and let's spread the word, folks. The Black Faces in High Places Challenge begins now. It begins today, and we invite you to be a part of it. Post to social media.
And Renee says here that it will air again on the author's social media next week. I'm going to invite you guys to be a part of my podcast. I'll have Renee touch base with you guys. And part of it is just extending networks when you have opportunity and platforms and the like. And we all just need to be mindful that we talk about it, but we don't always do it. So I hope everybody accepts the challenge. Thank you to all. Randall, I know you talked about the track challenge. I know that gets juices going, man, but just keep a seat. We don't want you tearing anything. It will be all right. But thank you all for joining us. Don't forget, please purchase the book. It is, as we like to say, wherever you get your books. And we hope that this was beneficial, and perhaps down the line we'll do it again. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, everybody.